IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, dear listener. You're listening to All Things Policy. I am Sapni GK, and I'm joined by my colleague today, Aditya Pareek, in a very interesting episode of ATP. Dear listener, today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Elena Chernenko. Dr. Chernenko is a special correspondent at the Russian business newspaper Kommersant. She covers subjects ranging from arms control, cyberspace, outer space, and the whole spectrum of Russian diplomacy and international affairs. She has a PhD from the Moscow State University and is also part of the think tank world. She is a member of the board of the Council on Foreign and Defense Relations and the Council of the PIR Center in Russia. Welcome, Dr. Chernenko.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Tensions between Russia and the West are making headlines with a lot of hysteria around the ongoing negotiations. There is a need for objectivity and considering all perspectives. And today we bring you a unique one. So let me also welcome you, Dr. Chernenko.
Thanks a lot.
So to start with, in context of the ongoing tensions with the collective West, how do you view the recent trend of public diplomacy, especially the Russian Foreign Ministry publishing draft treaties and their correspondence with their European and US counterparts?
You know, me as a journalist, I do kind of enjoy this new transparency because we are not used to this. I'm writing about the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for more than 10 years. And it was usually us journalists hunting for all of these confidential documents, trying to get even one sentence out of it to publish it. And now the ministry itself publishes their letters with their Western counterparts, or, for example, in December, they gave them agreements that they would like to discuss with them. And just 2 days later, they also publish them on the official ministry website so everybody can read into this. I like it because it's clear what is the topic of discussion. It's you don't have different sources telling you different stuff about what is on the table. But I do understand that it is not usual for diplomacy and sometimes maybe even not helpful, because if you put your cards on the table right away, you don't have so much room for maneuver. And the diplomats do say, actually, that diplomacy likes it to be quiet. So I enjoy it as a journalist, but I also understand that it might make the negotiations a bit more difficult if everything is open.
Sapni, would you like to?
I think that's a very interesting take on this. Thank you, Elena. I think I'll move a little further and something not directly in relation to public diplomacy, but talking about cyberspace. And I observe that the online space is quite an active space for Russian feminism to thrive. And we have seen an increased focus on preserving traditional Russian values in official documents related to national security, etc. And some have even observed that there is a perpetual mental war of sorts, or a culture war between Russia and the West on these matters. So how do you see that? How do you see that in the current situation?
I hope very much that all the trends that you mentioned, Sapni, that they don't turn into like a new reason for mutual hostility, and that there will be no walls, no mental or cultural walls between Russia and other countries. But you're absolutely right that there is this trend that Russia is kind of portraying itself and being more conservative than liberal democracies from the West, that is trying to protect so-called traditional values. And there it is being confronted with a position of non-understanding by most Western countries that are kind of being very progressive on some topics. Well, for the Russian society, I must say that I feel that it's not something it's not an invention of the Russian government that yes, we are not now going to be more conservative than the rest of the world, or let's say the Western world. it is a genuine feeling in the society that some things are okay and some maybe not that okay. So Russia is still a very, I would not say maybe patriarchal, but it is a conservative society. Some of the very progressive things that we are watching in the West right now, they will not be able to take ground here so fast, at least. And some things are basically non-understood here. People raise their eyebrows when they read, for example, about young children of a school age being already able to, let's say, choose hormone therapy and change their sex because they feel from childhood that they are of a different gender. In Russia, the discussion is that, for example, on this very topic is no, children should not be doing this because it's too early for them to decide what gender they are. Such decisions could only be taken when a person is grown up. We should not give absolute freedoms on such crucial issues to people who are very young age and other things like that. So I think it's a natural characteristic of the Russian society that it is more conservative than Western countries. And it is time to get rid of illusions that Russia is absolutely a kind of a Western country. No, it's different. It has its own way.
That's a very interesting take, and I think coming from India, I do understand how that might be playing out in Russia. While there are obvious differences, and again, I think probe a little bit more on the question of online spaces and how that is sort of maybe changing, and how that has affected the conversations in Russia about these things. How do you see that, Ellen?
Well, I think a few years ago, or maybe a decade ago, it was considered that the online space in which we are all connected, no matter where you are in India, in Russia, in Europe, Africa, or whatever, that this interconnection will make things not only global, but equal. Like we will all do maybe the same stuff and think that our mentality would go closer to each other. It will all kind of connect us and make us more the same. But now it feels that no, it doesn't make us more the same if we're interconnected. And I think it is not needed. It is wonderful when people are different, mentalities are different, social structures of countries, and all of that. I mean, we should actually be able to profit from that. I'm working on a long time biographical project. And within that project, just a few days ago, I was reading a very famous speech by Mikhail Gorbachev at the UN from 1988. He said there at that speech, that was at the very, very end of the Cold War, just 3 years before the Soviet Union collapsed. So he had this idea that the Cold War should be over, but we should not kind of totally interengage with each other. Or he meant like not be the same, but profit from the variety of the choices, maybe religion, ideology, political preferences, whatever. So it never really materialized because for many years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was trying to be part of that Western paradigm, to be part of what it thought was its future model, the liberal democratic model. Now Russia is understanding, I think, that that's not the only way to go. There can be other choices. And I think that in online, we are witnessing very much the same, that people also understand that this is just another part of offline, online. There's still borders, there's still differences, but it's not a bad thing.
And I think that's a very interesting point and a good takeaway that we have, that we will benefit more from diversity than homogeneity. I think
Absolutely.
on that point, I think I'll move on to another question. And amongst the current crisis that we are facing, that have all the various instances that have been happening in the Russosphere, there was a kind of an olive branch movement in the form of the US-Russia cooperation in putting an end to cybercriminal activity, as it was indicated from the arrest of the ransomware group Pre-Evil by the FSB. So could you give us and our listeners a brief idea about Russia's position on international cooperation and responsible behavioral norms in the cyberspace, given we are talking about internet and the cyberspace? What do you think, or what are your thoughts on that particular incident? And if there are any analysis you would like to share with us on Russia's position on international norms in the cyberspace?
I need to give a little bit of history, but I hope it's not a boring part. Well, there is the only document that has kind of a potential right now to be of a global nature in cyber crime prevention right now is the so-called Budapest Convention of the Council of Europe from 2001. Russia is the only country which is member of the Council of Europe but has not signed this document, whereas there are several dozens of other countries that are not members of the Council of Europe but have signed these documents. For example, Japan and Australia, I think. India is not part of that document too. And there is a particular reason why Russia was skeptical about it and still is. Within that convention on cybercrime prevention, I think about 63 countries or so are members of it by now. There is one position which Russia interprets as trans-border access to stored data of other countries without the official mutual assistance request from the country that feels attacked and wants to investigate this incident. So kind of, let's say if you are thinking that there was an attack on your server in India and it came from Russia, if both countries were part of that convention, you would probably not need to ask the Russian government for an official mutual assistance request, but you could just access a server in Russia and look for information that you need and try to investigate it yourself. So Russia thinks that this is a breach of sovereignty and of the rights of a country over its cyber infrastructure. So Russia was not part of that document. In 2017, it proposed an alternative document without this cross-border access provision. And it is now, since a few years, trying to promote it at the United Nations. There will be a discussion on this starting just in a few months, this spring, where all of the countries of the world will be able to engage and propose norms and a global document for cybercrime prevention. And I hope this will make things easier, because right now what we are witnessing is mostly cooperation on a bilateral level. Right now we are witnessing this, for example, very actively between Russia and the US. They have not been engaged in such cooperations for many years. It only restarted after the Biden administration came in, and there was a few really massive ransomware attacks where lots of businesses in the US suffered from what the US government is thinking attacks coming from the Russian territory. So they were interested in cooperating with the Russian government and try to stop this. And we do see fruitful cooperation, especially in the last weeks. We see almost every second or third day news about more and more hackers being brought to justice. So they're arrested. They're going to face criminal charges, and there's going to be sentences for them. So Russia shows that it's ready to cooperate on a bilateral level, but it's also interested in a global convention. Right now, I don't think that this process will be fast. It's going to take a few more years, but I hope it will lead to success, because cybercrime is a big deal. It is a big problem.
Definitely. I think that's something we definitely have to look forward to. And I'm quite interested in how this would sort of play out in the conversation around data localization and things that have been happening across the globe, where I would say regulatory approaches to these concerns have been increasingly varying, but also interesting to note. I think on that note, we'll probably take a short break, and then we'll come back and continue talking about Russian foreign policy with Dr. Elena Chernenko.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IBM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by actor and producer and author Tushar Kapoor. They discuss his new book, Bachelor Dad and Life as a Single Parent. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik asks Ajit Andhare about his journey from a practicing engineer to the COO of Viacom 18 Studios. On the Wire Talk, Siddharth is joined by social scientist Thomas Bloom Hansen. They discuss the escalating violence in India. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth contemplates whether Facebook's crash is a blip or a sign of things to come. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav takes us to Himachal's most sought-after tourist destination, Manali. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our others for that matter, please do tell a friend. Don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms that you're listening to us, whether it's a rating, whether it's a review, it all helps. And do remember to check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. They're available on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back, listeners. We are talking to Dr. Elena Chernenko about Russian foreign policy. So the next question I have for you, Elena, is on, again, matters related to cyberspace. So how do you, and we were just talking about data localization, and I would like to come back to that. So how do you see the international data transfer and business data related concerns shaping up in the current context of rising tensions, like data localization again, and the actions against international technology conglomerates like Google and Meta/Facebook? And that's a trend we have observed in Russia. So how do you see the way forward, particularly with respect to international data transfers and business data related concerns?
It is a big issue, and it's a very good question, Sapni, because it's a concern of most governments. And I believe India is concerned about is just the same, how to protect their personal data of the citizens in a globalized world where all of the personal information is so exposed to global IT giants, where they can basically do anything with the data they have. It's not controlled by local governments. They don't sometimes even know what's happening with that data that's being stored. So there is some countries that have gone a really long way already to protect their citizens' data. For example, the European Union members, they have quite strict data protection laws by now. Russia is not that far, but since a few years, it's taking also an effort to convince or maybe to push even companies to localize their data. It's working with limited success. Some don't do this as fast as the Russian authorities would like it to do, and they get fined. In the end, usually there is an agreement that works out, and none of the big companies had to leave the Russian market so far because of this. But it is definitely a concern. And in the last year, I would say we have seen or maybe in the last 2 years, very, very openly and very vividly how much power IT giants have over our life. They have already almost became something of a government or so, or definitely a very powerful player in the global field. Just remember, for example, how the social networks in the US all shut down the accounts of the former president, Donald Trump. I mean, he was still president back then. It was unbelievable that one can do that you can actually cut off the possibility of a current US president to communicate with his followers. And he did still have quite a lot of them through social media because they think that he violated the rules. I mean, you might be not a fan of Trump, and I am neither, but this is just not something that you do. This is, I think this shows that they do have too much power over the information that we are getting. And sometimes, I mean, I do write about cyber, and I'm very, very kind of the part of the cyber world myself. I have, 100 apps, and I'm online almost 24/7. But I do feel that this is already getting too much even for me. And I'm even thinking about kind of this, internet or app diet. I don't know, Sapni, if you feel sometimes the same.
I think, yes, information overload is definitely a concern. And yes, as you rightly pointed out, I mean, the power question is something that looms large around the globe for countries as well as multi-stakeholder organizations such as the UN, that certain companies have so much power over the narrative and the conversations we have. And that's something I think the cyber world is definitely looking into, whether it be by policymakers, whether it by the courts, whether it be by policy analysts like us here at Takshara. And I think there is some sort of movement happening. And again, I think I'm coming back to this word that I'm repeating a lot this episode. It is interesting. It's a very dynamic space, and it's a lot of stuff that's happening that we are keeping close watch on.
You asked also at the end of the first part about this effort, the global effort to make some rules of behavior for states, and I forgot to answer that part of your question and I think it's important because India is one of the most active players in this field. So if you take the United Nations venue, there is on cyber 2 tracks. One of them is a cybercrime track that we already talked about. The other one is an effort that's going on for more than 20 years already, where states are trying to elaborate for themselves some rules of responsible behavior. Because right now, there is no special regulation for what states can or cannot do in global cyberspace. I mean, there is the international law and they agree that it applies to cyberspace, but they did not really say how it applies. So there's many differences. And because there is no regulation and no convention, no clear rules, everybody is just doing what they like. So it's kind of a big playground for global geopolitics, for intelligence services, for military services. Everybody is using cyber opportunities as a nice toolbox to reach their goals without being limited by anything. So there is this effort at the UN to try to elaborate at least very, very basic norms for what states should not be doing and can be doing and should be doing. And India is a very active participant of this, for which I'm very happy of.
I think my personal take on that would also be that, we've been trailing behind technology for quite some time now. So that such efforts are really the need of the hour. And it is,
Absolutely,
as you said, it's highly, highly welcome that we put probably more effort into that and it sort of converts into concrete decisions.
Yeah, very much so.
I think the debate about the UN figuring out the rules of the road for outer space is pretty much related, and it's just a coincidence that it's also happening at the same time. So that too segues into my question pretty well. So I must confess, this is a context that I got from your reporting in Kommersant, Elena. So Russia has signed several bilateral and one multilateral agreement with CSTO about non-placement of first weapons in outer space. Many of these are with countries that have no spacefaring capabilities and possibly never will. How do you see Russia's approach to international cooperation and responsible behavior in outer space?
So this was indeed a topic that we researched too, because following the activities of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I could not really understand why are they signing so many agreements with for non-placing weapons in outer space with countries that will definitely not have any space weapon programs for the decades, even with the smallest ones. And when it amounted, like, I don't know, to 40 such agreements or so, I actually approached the Russian government with that question, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, why are you doing all this? So the explanation I got, it actually makes, some sense. The idea is such: we cannot so far convince the big guys to sign an agreement, a global agreement, that weapons should not be put into outer space. There is no agreement on that yet. For example, we have different points of view on this with the Americans, with the bigger European countries. So there is no consensus. If we have the international community, the most part of it, standing behind this idea. So if we have, 100 such agreements, it doesn't matter if the countries that signed them are small. It matters because their opinion is that there should be no weapons in space. Then we can maybe come back to the UN and say, hey, look, we have 100 UN members that don't want weapons to be put in outer space. You have to listen to them and to us. Let's start discussing that. Now, what the opponents of the Russian initiative, which is a Russian-Chinese initiative by now, are saying, well, look, just prohibiting putting weapons in outer space is not enough. You also have to prohibit anti-satellite weapons placed on Earth. And Russia just conducted a few months a test, which many say that it was an unhelpful test, let's say it like this, because it was a test to destroy an own object, a Russian object, old Soviet object in space. Well, the Russians tested their missile capabilities, but it also, according to some experts, created lots of debris in space. And this is unhelpful because there is already so much debris in space. So It's a difficult topic. Like Russia and China are saying, let's prohibit this. Others are saying, no, let's prohibit it all. This is not enough. Let's prohibit it all together. And there is no consensus. But I hope that we will see progress on this in the coming years. It's an important topic because, well, India is among those countries that also have blown up their own satellites and have created debris, which also was criticized by some. So we are kind of in this one pot right now. Let's see where this will go to.
Intriguing. And I absolutely agree. We really have to watch this space. And since I follow space policy at Takshashila, it is literally my job to do so. And moving on to the final point that I want to discuss in this episode, and it's about to my personal slice of heaven, the place that I look forward to being in. So, in your opinion, how does the Kremlin view the Russian Far East's role in Russia's foreign policy? Is it only about attracting investment in climate change issues affecting the economy, or is there a strategic security dimension to the Pacific territory? I'm specifically referring to the Sakhalin Oblast of Russia.
It sounds wonderful when you say my personal slice of heaven. Is just a very good picture. I hope that the interest towards this part of the world is genuine and that it is of a long, durable characteristic, because it wouldn't be wise to just turn to the east, let's say like that, or to the east and south, just because it doesn't work well with the West. This would be a short-sighted strategy. But I think it is of clear importance because Russia is so big and is situated territorially in different, basically, parts of the world, that it is equally interested and committed to developing relations with all neighbors, but also its own parts of the country that are not around Moscow and not to the west of Moscow. And I do think that the government is taking this seriously, and there is genuine interest and there is big plans to develop and kind of make this part more central to the Russian inner policy, but also to the Russian foreign policy. For me personally, I have a personal plan. I hope to get to travel more to this part of my own country. I don't know. I mean, if you and Sapni, if you travel a lot around India, I have not traveled a lot around Russia myself. And I really have this plan to go to faraway parts, which I would have to fly a few hours from Moscow because this is my country. I would like to explore it. I know there's wonderful and beautiful places to see, and I hope that I get to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I definitely do look forward to what you're going to come up with once you move to those sites of Russia and how your experiences are going to be, and how definitely looking forward to your reportage on that. And I think on that note, we are coming to a close on this episode of All Things Policy. Thank you, Elena. Thank you for joining Aditya and I, and for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. It was great having you over. And dear listeners, if you liked today's discussion, please do check out our past episodes of All Things Policy. Once again, Elena, thanks a lot. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great honor.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.
What is the workplace and how does your gender and body affect your right at work? Hey, I'm Priya Mirza, and on the Longest Constitution podcast, we critically examine the vision of the Indian Constitution and laws. In season 1, we looked at sex, gender, sexuality in India, and the landmark judgments which transformed our rights as citizens in this country. In season 2, we discussed the laws which shape the workplace and examine how ability, competence, and merit impact us, and much more. Join me, Priya Mirza, every Wednesday only on the IVM Podcast app, website, and all the major podcast streaming platforms.